In the ancient world, the date palm was called the tree of life. Dates were cultivated in the Middle East more than 8,000 years ago. But it was less than 100 years ago that the first date palms were brought to the United States. We'll find out more about the exciting story of dates today as Discovery takes a first-hand look at the changing face of the desert. Discovery 70, the award-winning program for young people with Bill Owen and Virginia Gibson.
Hi, welcome to Discovery. Today we're in the Coachella Valley in Southern California, a desert surrounded by mountains. Millions of years ago, this was a great inland sea. That's the waterline on the rocks you see behind us.
The name Coachella is derived from a word that means shell, and you can still find seashells today out here on the desert floor. Most of this valley is actually at or below sea level. It's part of a larger area called the Colorado Desert.
Although we're in California, it's the Colorado River 150 miles away that makes it possible for this desert to grow. And there's no other place in the United States that can provide both the great amount of water and the high temperatures that the date palm needs. This is the Telescodicus date garden. Date gardens are sometimes called groves. Although the date is a fruit, the term orchard has never been used for dates.
Most of the dates we see on our grocery shelves are a variety called Deglet Nur, which means date of light. There are almost 100 other varieties grown in this valley, but only 7 or 8 in any great quantity. The Codicus family has grown up in the date business. Telescodicus has been growing dates for almost 28 years. Mrs. Codicus helps out in the family date shop. The 3 girls, Pauline, 14, Elaine, 9, and Catherine, 7, go to school in the nearby town of Thermal. When they're at home, the 55-acre date garden behind their house becomes their backyard.
Telescodicus has 145 additional acres, with 10,000 date palms in all. He also grows tangerines, grapefruit, and grapes. None of this would be possible without plenty of water. And since the annual waterfall in this desert is only 2.5 inches a year, irrigation is an absolute necessity.
But before this desert land can respond to water, it has to be carefully prepared. Practically the only water this field will receive will come from irrigation, so it has to be made level. If the field is graded unevenly, the low spots will get too much water, and the high spots not enough. And the soil itself has to be leached, washed free of the alkali and salt it absorbed when this desert was the floor of the sea. It'll take 2 to 3 weeks to wash away the alkali and salt, depending on how much of these chemicals are in the soil. As the water runs off, a large amount has to replace it, more than would be needed for irrigation alone, since the purpose of this water is to flush out the chemicals. After the land is prepared, it'll need a steady supply of water for irrigation. This is the Coachella branch of the All-American Canal that brings the Colorado River water up from the main branch of the canal, which is right at the Mexican border. The canal runs up the eastern edge of the valley, past the Chocolate Mountains, Orocopia Mountains, and the Cottonwood Mountains.
At various points along the canal, sub-canals branch off. Then still farther on, these small canals reach the fields and gardens. They're able to supply a specific amount of water at a certain time of the day. These men who follow this tight schedule are called zanjeros, or ditch riders. It's the individual owner's responsibility to see that his water gate is open when the water comes, If it isn't, and the excess flow goes onto his neighbor's land, he's responsible for the damage it might cause in washed-out plantings.
There's an old saying that the only way a date palm can thrive is to have its feet in the water and its head in the blazing sun.
And the date palm can thrive in temperatures as high as 130 degrees, higher than any other productive plant. Strong as it is, there's no other crop that needs so much careful handwork for it to produce well. The palms that we see here with bunches of dates are all female. Over there is one male palm, necessary for the production of the female's fruit. The fertilization doesn't take place automatically. Man must arrange for it. We'll see how that's done in just a minute. The date palm is one of the world's oldest fruit-bearing trees. Early written records on clay tablets and crude pictographs tell us that the cultivation of date palms, very much like these, began in the valley of the Euphrates along the shore of the Persian Gulf about 8,000 years ago.
Early in the 1900s, Bernard Johnson, a German immigrant who had traveled widely before coming to this valley, decided that dates might be able to flourish here in this climate. He left the Coachella Valley and went to Algeria to learn something about date cultivation. In the fall of 1903, he was back here with 129 young palm trees representing 6 varieties. Because there were so few palms then and so few offshoots on the new trees, there was an early effort to grow date palms from seeds. It was unsuccessful for a very simple reason. Half of the seeds planted produced male trees, which are non-fruit-bearing. Since a tree is several years old before the sex can be known, it was soon evident that the only way you could be sure of having a grove of all fruit-bearing palms was to plant offshoots from a female tree.
Male trees are important in a grove, but only one is needed for every 49 female trees. The male tree's pollen-bearing flowers are much larger and showier than the female flowers. However, since nature's date pollination is so random, pollination is done by man to ensure greater productivity.
The pollen has to be collected by hand from the male tree early in the morning before wind or bees can get to it. With fresh pollen, 2 or 3 strands of the male flower are inverted between the strands of the female flower during the first 2 or 3 days after it's opened. To keep them in place, a slip knot of twine is tied around the 2 flowers.
After the female palm is pollinated, the fertilized flower clusters are tied to the mid-rib of one of the lower fronds. Earlier in the winter, the spines on the lower stems are removed so that it's possible to pollinate the palm as well as tie the developing bunches to the lower fronds for support. When dry, these spines are as hard as metal, and in the more primitive countries, they're used for needles.
A date palm does not shed its leaves as many other trees do. It also varies in other ways. It's a monocotyledon, which means it has a single growing point or bud and does not grow a cambium layer of new wood each year. If the single growing point or bud is damaged, the date palm dies. The fronds on these trees are arranged evenly in 13 vertical columns. On some trunks, they spiral slightly to the left, on others to the right. By counting the number of fronds in one of these columns at the top of the tree and multiplying by 13, it's possible to estimate almost precisely the number of fronds on a tree. 13 fronds are needed to provide food for each bunch of dates.
Even though there's very little rain in the desert, that small amount during the ripening season can cause the skin of the dates to blister, as well as cause souring or fermentation. These paper cones protect the fruit from the rain and from being eaten by birds. September is the start of the date picking season. They can be harvested several times. Each time, only the ripe bunches are picked.
The early harvesting methods in Coachella Valley in the date industry weren't methods. It was just one method, and that was picking dates by hand. We had the men climb the trees approximately 3 or 4 times. They climb up by ladder and hang from the palm fronds in a saddle or something that looks like a bosun's chair. They had buckets with them, pick the dates one at a time by hand, put them in the buckets which were hanging along with them, and lower them to the ground. They would move around the tree and harvest the entire palm. At that time, they would then go back down the ladder and empty the buckets into the lug boxes, which were then sent on to the plant. The way mechanical harvesting works is that we have a vehicle upon which we have a boom mounted. Now this boom will be raised and then extended up into the bunches that are hanging on the date palm. This boom can go as high as 60 feet. The man at that time will begin cutting each bunch from the palm and put it into the basket. He'll cut one at a time and go completely around the tree until all bunches are harvested. He'll then have all the bunches in the basket. The operator of the boom will then retract the boom and lower it. The dates will be dropped into a large hopper. We then have an operator of our mechanical shaker. He will pick up the bunches one at a time and insert them into the shaker, and in a few seconds, all the ripe dates are removed from the bunch. The unpollinated fruit and the unripe fruit is left on the bunch as it adheres more strongly to the strands of the bunch. A normal crop would be approximately 36 million pounds. Last year's crop was exceptionally heavy. It was 42 million pounds, which was just about, I think, an industry record. This year's crop we're estimating to be 27 million pounds. Now, the reason that this crop is so light is that during the spring, we had warm weather which brought all the blooms on at one time. Therefore, the pollination was not as good as it should have been. That, in turn, reduced the amount of fruit. However, what fruit we do have is of very good quality.
The dates here are Deglet Noor, the most popular date for commercial use since it doesn't bruise easily in handling. Deglet Noor palms usually produce a larger amount of fruit than most other varieties.
Some of the other date palms here are the Kadrawi, like these, the Halawi, the Medjool, and the Barhi. And sometime soon there may be an entirely new variety from some of the trees that haven't matured yet. Cutting a new palm tree away from its parent tree is a difficult process that must be handled very carefully. We'll see how that's done in just a minute.
These are Barhi palm trees. Barhi means hot, dry wind. The Barhi is a soft date and almost round. These are ripe. Some of the others will ripen later on the tree. The Barhi is delicate, and as a fresh date, it's difficult to ship, so it's usually consumed here in the valley.
This is the Medjool. It's one of the largest dates, and it's also a soft date. Like the Deglet Noor, it's a large producer and yields as much as 300 pounds a tree. Its extra large size is created by thinning out the fruit before it matures. So much handwork is needed that it makes it much too expensive for mass production. In the short time the date palm has thrived in the Coachella Valley, there has been a constant research program to find new, improved varieties of dates. This is Roy W. Nixon, consultant to the United States Department of Agriculture. He spent a good deal of his life studying and writing about the date. And these are some of the experimental date palms that have been grown from seed.
A male palm can be distinguished from a female palm only by the flowers, which begin to appear about the third or fourth year. However, if you propagate from offshoots, as all the varieties, commercial varieties are, you know that this palm will be exactly like the parent variety. On the other hand, if seeds are planted, a young palm will not be determined as whether it's a female or male until it begins to flower about the third or fourth year. We have to continue research because no sooner is one problem solved than another arises. In the beginning, we were studying cultural problems. We pretty well understand that now, but in recent years, the scarcity and high cost of labor has caused us to re-examine most of our operations.
Because the date crop has increased to millions of pounds in the past few years, it's been necessary to find newer and faster methods of processing and packaging dates. Since the Deglet Noor are picked in quantity, there are different degrees of ripeness on each stem. First, the dates that do not come up to standard are eliminated. Then the softer dates are sorted by touch and color. The paler ones are underripe.
Next, the dates are pitted. This pitting machine can remove date pits at the rate of 8,000 an hour. The uniformly sorted dates drop into these chambers. The rows of dates move under the plungers, which drop down into the center of the date, forcing the pit out the bottom. After curing and pitting, the dates are quickly packaged. Each day's production is tested by the Department of Agriculture inspectors. They check moisture content and size.
These young date palms are 5 years old, but they won't produce an acceptable crop until they're 8 to 10 years old. They'll reach full productivity when they're about 20, and could continue to produce until they're over 100 years old. However, at that age, their extreme height makes it too difficult to pollinate, tie them down, bag them, and inspect them during the season. Careful date cultivation requires a lot of attention, as many as 10 to 12 trips up the tree each season. The higher the tree, the harder it is to care for it.
So every date grower has to plan to replenish his grove by starting new growths to replace the older ones. These are called offshoots, or suckers, and are only produced by young trees up to 15 years old. This female palm will produce only female offshoots, and the pollen-producing male only male. Any male tree can pollinate any female palm of any variety. The variety will be determined by the female tree.
Cutting off the offshoot at the base of a mature tree is a very delicate operation. Care must be taken not to injure either the parent tree or the offshoot. The offshoot is 3 to 5 years old and has produced its own roots before it's ready to be separated from the parent tree. It can weigh from 40 to 100 pounds and be 8 to 14 inches in diameter. It's a two-man operation, one man guiding the chisel, the other hammering it between the shoot and the tree. At no time must the offshoot be pulled away from the parent tree. Here we see the growing bud, sometimes called the heart of the palm. If it's injured, the future growth of the date palm is endangered.
They're planted 30 feet apart, a great distance for such small trees. But in 15 years, it will be just enough. As with most new plants, a great deal of water is necessary for the young date palm.
Just a few short years ago, this whole valley was a dry, burning desert. Pioneers in this area had hard lives trying to find a way to live here.
Now here in the Coachella Valley, with summer temperatures in the hundreds and abundant water used carefully, the face of the desert is fresh and growing all year round. We'll be back in just a minute.
We hope you've enjoyed today's program about dates and the changing face of the desert.
If you'd like to find out more about life in the desert, then ask your librarian for any of these books. American Desert Animals by B.F. Beebe, Southwest Desert Wonderland by Norman Hammond Wakeman, and this book, Elfowl by Marion Conrad Buff.
Be sure to be with us next week for another exciting program as Discovery continues to discover the world. Bye-bye.
Bye.
The Discovery Production Unit's domestic transportation and promotional consideration provided by United Airlines. This has been a Jules Power production in association with ABC News.